There we go. Okay. So we've got a few familiar names here, and we've got some names that I think there must be some staff from some agencies that joined us today. So I don't know, do you want everybody to do an introduction, Elaine, or are you okay? We'll just introduce you and you can get started, or?
I guess it just depends on how many people are here. If it's a small group, it usually is fine, but if it's a big group, it might take too long. So, I mean, I can't see who's here.
Oh, okay. Well,
I mean,
we've got,
because you said that they're people that are live in person, correct?
yep. We've
Yeah,
got 16 on right now, so.
Yeah, that's quite a few.
Yeah, so
And we
maybe
can't
we'll
have
just.
them put it in the chat because they're not on a computer, correct? So we can't say, where are you from? Or are they? I mean, looks
No,
like
they're on their computers.
they're computers. Well, you know, what I would invite people to do is say a little bit about themselves in the chat. Like, you know, of course, we're going to know their name, but, you know, what they do in the world and how they work with children or families. And if they're connected to an agency, and that's oftentimes good for everyone to know in case people don't know one another. So why don't I invite them to do that?
Okay, that sounds great. So if everybody wants to jump on the chat, thank you for coming today. I'm very excited that Elaine is here. I've heard her presentation a couple of different times, and she's kind of tweaked it a little bit for us today so we can kind of concentrate on some of that early childhood pieces. That really is the work that this network does. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Carolyn Sternett, and I coordinate the Early Childhood Mental Health Network. And Elaine is the developer of the community resilience model. And she is going to talk to us on how to cultivate well-being in individuals and communities, and how the community resilient model is used for self-care for kids, teens, and adults. So I'm going to turn it over to her. She's going to talk a little bit about where she all started from and things, and we'll just keep going.
Okay, well, and I just noticed as people are putting information into the chat, I always love to see where people are from. So I hope that people, and this is always an invitation to do this, but we have early education teachers. There's Sarah Olson. Well, Lisa's here and she says hi. Hi, Lisa. And Amy is from the Otter Tail County Human Services, a children's mental health case manager. Oh, such an important job. And Brooke is also behavioral health care coordinator with Prime West, and Jesse, RN behavioral health care coordinator with Prime West also. Sierra, children's mental health case manager for Western Prairie Human Services from the Glenwood office. Kayla Nelson, Horizon Public Health. Annie Vegan, that's a good last name. Becker County Public Health, complete early childhood screenings for Detroit Lakes and Frazee School, clinical liaison for CTC, and all these different acronyms. P4HCHB. Okay, people know what that is, I assume. Rhonda, I'm the founder of the director of the Jasmine Child Care and Preschool in Fargo. I'm a preschool PETA, that's Vian. And okay, Lisa's telling us she's a public health nurse. I always think that public health nurses, they're always such boots on the ground. I worked with public health nurse when I was a social worker, when I used to do clinical work. I still am a social worker, so I haven't changed that. And then Jeannie is Early Childhood Thrive Initiative Coordinator. Okay, well, if anybody else wants to put it in, I'm probably not going to read anybody else's name now, but I am Elaine Miller-Karas, like you've already said, Carolyn, and I have had such a great honor of bringing the community resiliency model forward. And I'm going to, talk about kids, but it's also talking about parents and caregivers, because as we know with little ones, if they're having a tough time, oftentimes their parents are having a tough time. And so when we can help parents also understand a little bit about some of the concepts that I'm going to share with you, it helps the children. And so also I want you all to feel free, and Carolyn, if you can help me with this, if you have any questions along the way, you can just pause me and say, oh, Lena, but I have this question. That always makes it a lot of fun for me too, as we're going forward with a presentation. So I'm going to share my screen right now. And I sent this forward. Carolyn, did you send this all out to folks so that they have copies of it? Oh, I can't hear you because you're muted.
I sent it out to our network members, and so hopefully they
Great.
passed it along to their
Okay.
staff people that were coming. If not, and they want to throw their email in the chat, I can send it to them right now.
Okay, perfect. It's called the Community Resiliency Model, and we're going to call it CRIM for short. And I always like to say a little bit about, CRIM developed really as a result of working in San Bernardino County, where I live very near. And I was working in a primary health clinic, and people who were coming to that primary health clinic, adults, kids, it was the whole, cradle to grave, is that it was really clear that so much of what people were experiencing when they came in with, oh, my stomach hurts, my head hurts, I can't sleep, oftentimes it was connected to their stress and to their trauma. But oftentimes we in the helping professions, I think it's changing, we didn't get a lot of information about, other than talking and being supportive and being active listeners, how we might be able to help people kind of come into what we're going to talk about, which is the resilient zone, so that they can help to kind of regulate their own nervous system. And kind of think about it this way: if we have a dysregulated nervous system, and I'm going to explain what that is in a bit, then it's really hard for us to regulate others. And this is really important for parents, right? If oftentimes people say that parents are the tuning fork for their children. And I've certainly worked with, again, parents who have been pregnant, who've had small children into the teen years. And sometimes when I had like an active psychotherapy practice, which I always did that part-time, that someone would bring me their teenager in, and oftentimes the teenager was the symptom bearer of the family, and they were oftentimes the healthiest person in the family. So I just think that when we look at the whole system of how we work with families, it's just really important that we look at how we can change things systemically, not only sometimes within our organizations, but also to help people understand how one thing impacts another. And there's a system within families, and there's also that synchronization that happens between the caregivers and the child. So, but the community resiliency model really grew out of wanting to help people understand kind of that trauma-informed lens. And then it really grew into, oh, but there's not only the trauma-informed, but there's the resiliency-informed lens. And that is really important that we take that in mind. So the community resiliency model that I'm going to share with you today can be used across a lifespan, and it can be used across cultures. In fact, this week I was just sending an email to a wonderful young woman I met who is, her name is Sana Akbey, and she lives in Istanbul, and she came to a community resiliency model teacher training I did many years ago. And there is a number of workshops that have happened in Turkey, and many of them have happened for individuals who've been working in the areas that the earthquake was hit very hard. And so they bring this again to everyone so that people can help get back into their zone, so they can, kind of restructure their lives and recover from such a terrible tragedy. But I can say that I have personally been to most continents. I haven't been to Antarctica or to Australia, but I've been to most continents, and I've shared this work and really seen how people have really grasped a hold of it. I think we're in about 75 countries now, and they've used their own cultural lens on how they've adapted the model to help themselves and their community. We also have seen that this can be used with different abilities. So you may have, as you're working with your screenings, and you may identify kids with different learning challenges that they may have. And also you may be identifying parents that have different learning challenges and different abilities, that we really can help really all people learn how to regulate their nervous system. So it can be used with people that have different challenges in those areas as well. And then also, we have just trained people from just a wide variety of backgrounds. So I can say that, we've trained people that are kind of boots on the ground. We've trained healthcare providers, academics, first responders, people in social services. So it really is, I hope that you can see, can be used really across the lifespan and with people of all backgrounds. But I want to start with this question as we get going today. And those of you that may have heard me speak before, I often start this way. But let's take a moment for each one of us to think about what or who uplifts us, what or who gives us strength. And if we're having a difficult time in our life, what or who helps us get through those hard times? And let's just take a pause. And for those of you, it's always an invitation that want to, you can put your answer in the chat. I'm going to say. And so, and I'm going to ask maybe Carolyn to read what's coming up in the chat. Well, I can go ahead and read it too. Nature, granddaughter, family, and dogs. That's what's mine. And that's not necessarily in that order. Grandchildren, uplift me, friends and family. Seeing one of the kids I'm teaching really excel and become successful. Helping my mom, my mother. Being outside, walking, time with friends and family and friends. You can see that, those of you that are responding, and maybe those of you that are just thinking about it, I've asked these questions all over the world and people tend to give the same answers. So, that always kind of etches in me kind of our common humanity and what's important to us. Also, music, family and friends, partner, kids, and music. All sorts of things can be those kinds of things that help us get through difficulties. But, as you're thinking about your answer to some of these questions, and even maybe hearing me say some of the things that other people have said, I'm just going to invite you to pause for just a second and to peek into what you may notice on the inside of your body. Like, I know that if I think about my granddaughter, I have a smile on my face, but I just also have this kind of really solid sense of kind of my core strength, but also warmth. She's only 6 and she's such a love, but she's not here with me right now, but I can think of her, see her, think about the last things I did with her. And I can bring those moments into the present moment. And that can really help me cultivate my well-being. So it's not just thinking about these things, it's also starting to pay attention to how it might change our physiology, our nervous system, and bringing us back into maybe a even clearer kind of zone of well-being. Or if you felt that you weren't in your zone of well-being when we started, sometimes these very simple questions can help us get back in. I just noticed I took a deeper breath, and we're going to talk more about the importance of paying attention to the different changes that happen on the inside. Okay, let's go to the next. So people often ask me, okay, what does resiliency mean? And I've asked many people those questions as well. And I would love for you all to think about that. When you think about being resilient, what does that mean to you? But what happens as I go around the world is that resiliency is not always a word that people embrace. Sometimes they say, gosh, I feel like it's almost been weaponized to say, oh, you're resilient, so we don't need to give you services, or you have so much in your community that, we're not going to give you that grant that you may know that you really need. So that's why I think it's important that I want you to know what I mean about resiliency. And first and foremost, what I've seen about in resilient people and also in communities is that they lead with compassion and empathy. They also not only acknowledge their individual and collective suffering, but they don't stay there. They kind of lean into it and they go, well, but let's talk about our individual and collective strengths, and also start to bring more attention there. And then it's really, hello, yes? Okay.
What's your problem, Molly?
Um, was there a question?
I think somebody's just not muted. I'm gonna,
Okay, thank you. So in any event, but when I talk about resiliency, and I really talk about well-being, to me, those two words are interchangeable, and it's embodied well-being. It's not only, again, what we think and feel, but it's also what we're sensing, so that we have that mind-body connection of well-being. And when we do this, there's such an amazing thing that I've seen all over the world, and that is people become more solution focused with the problems they're facing. So if I'm talking to somebody right now, I've been doing a project in Ukraine, and I'm talking to teachers there, and they're telling me all these amazing things they're doing for their children that you can imagine have suffered greatly. But they're about how they are nurturing optimism and hope. And I have seen it all over the globe after sometimes the worst things that have happened. And I often think that if we do lose our hope, it's very hard for us to live life. And so, but hope is so connected to well-being. And there's the ancient story of Pandora. And I always kind of like to reference that because that's an ancient story. And Pandora had a jar, actually, and she was the daughter of Zeus, and she wasn't supposed to open the jar, but she was curious. I just love the fact that she was curious, because curiosity, I think, is also what helps us create solutions. But in any event, so she opened the jar, and all the ills in the world came out. And so, but at the very bottom of the jar was Elpis, and Elpis is hope. And that's what Zeus left for humankind to deal with all the challenges and sufferings of the world. And that is so embedded in my kind of vista of what resiliency and well-being looks like. And also, I think the other thing I want to say about it too, being resilient doesn't mean that we don't suffer. And it doesn't mean that we don't get exhausted sometimes and also feel a little weak-kneed at times, going, oh my gosh, there's so much. But it also means that we can shift, and we can also pay attention to what I often say, which I really want you to consider this question as well. What else is true in your life? A Ukrainian woman said to me recently, Elaine, when you asked me that question, what else is true in my life, I realized that we Ukrainians have very strong DNA. We've lived through World War I, World War II, the Great Famine, the Stalin regime, and now this. And my parents and my family have endured it all, but also endured it with grace, with humor, and with love for one another. And I thought, wow, I don't know if I could be so optimistic when knowing what she's facing. And yet that, I think, is something that is inherent in human beings. So, okay, that is my definition of resiliency. So what we're going to talk about now is get a little bit into like the trauma informed. And I know that many of you have taken workshops, and you're going to get my lens on this. And what I've learned is what I think important to talk about. So when we talk about trauma, traumatic individual and communal experiences can result in a stress response. And, we all have this in different ways, either our local community, but I've certainly seen in the United States and in other countries, this stress response having with more frequency, even by watching the news, which I try not to do very much anymore. But stress can be described as being positive, tolerable, and toxic. And I'm going to go and do a deeper dive into what that means. And I believe that these descriptions are important because they refer to the stress response system's effect on the body, not the actual experiences or events that were stressful themselves. And why that's important is that many times people that we want to impact, the parents, let's say, of the children that you're caring about, is that they don't sometimes want to be diagnosed with something. They want to just feel better. They want to parent their child. They want to be able to live a life where they have housing, they have enough food to feed their children, all those kinds of things that we know exist. But when we help people understand the stress response, that it's physiological, and I try to say this, it's about biology, not that you're a weak person, that helps people understand that we all can experience stress, and that there are ways that we can help ourselves that can make us better parents, better teachers, more effective in everything that we do. And that understanding the science is a very important thing. And it can be done simply. And I've taught people that have the most education in the world and people that, let's say in the Central Plateau of Haiti, where I've been many times, that do not have the same advantages of having education as we do in the United States. And I can teach these concepts and they get it. And because they understand that they've experienced that in their body. So we're going to learn some wellness skills, which are the antidotes, kind of the elixir. When we are in states of distress, how do we get out of them? So I'm going to talk a little bit about adverse child experiences, again, knowing that many of you are versed on it, but I think the biological impact of adverse child experiences has illuminated the need to redesign our approaches that help people who experience traumatic stress. And that means we just can't, we can't just talk to them about it. And many of you know that if a 2-year-old's in the middle of a tantrum, I haven't found it very effective to try to say, well, why are you having this tantrum right now? Because the child is what we would say out of their resilience zone. But there are ways physiologically that we can help a child that is having a tantrum that has to do with understanding the science and how once we do that, that we can help that child get back into their zone. And then in the way that's developmentally appropriate, we can have conversations. And so this is why this is so essential for us to know that as people who care for children, parents, teachers, caregivers, and the children themselves. Also, there's a lot of research, and I'm just going to, drop this one in. This is Dr. George Bonanno. He's done a lot of research about cognitive-based ways of intervening with individuals, and he finds that that doesn't often help, because sometimes when we're distressed, and we see that, right? We've seen that a lot with parents who are having a hard time with a kid. Sometimes their prefrontal cortex is not completely available to them. If we can help them get back into their zone of well-being, which is, we call it a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down, then that sometimes can help them. Oh, okay, I'm in my zone. Oh, now that I'm seeing that, okay, I need to do this for my kid. And that may help them with whatever challenges that they have. So let's go into talking about what these different stress levels are. So positive stress is kind of, this happens to all of us, right? We've all had positive stress. Maybe we have to take a test. Maybe we have to get someplace quickly and we're a little bit late. And so it's a mild to moderate stressor. And we have a brief stress response. Maybe our heartbeat, beats a little fast, but, once we get to our location, oh gosh, I'm a little late, but I'm going to be okay. Or I've taken the test and I passed, the body returns to balance quite quickly. Now, tolerable stress is a little bit different. So it's a time-limited stressor that results in short-acting changes. So we again might notice our heart rate, tense muscles, and we're not getting back into our zone of well-being quickly. And so we may need support from our social network, for example, to return to a more balanced state that we can feel better in mind, body, and spirit. And this could, you can think of some examples of this. It could be, you had a fight with one of your family members, and you need to talk to another family member to kind of get yourself back into your zone, and the wake of it lasts a bit longer, but you're going to get through it. Now, toxic stress, I think, is what many people are experiencing today. I imagine that many of the families that you are taking care of and trying to impact have experienced toxic stress. And that's the ongoing and relentless body responses to intense stressors. So that means that, I like to explain it like this. It's like you are driving a car and you put your foot on the accelerator of your car and you do not know that there's a brake and that your foot gets stuck on the accelerator. So you're going way too fast for way too long. That can cause you to be in all sorts of danger. So this is like prolonged activation of your stress response. And there's not protective factors that are helping to mitigate or reduce the impacts of what you're having, or you don't even know there's a brake that you can put on. And so we know that kids, and many of the little kiddos that you're taking care of, they may be living in households where their little nervous systems are experiencing this toxic stress. So what you do to help those parents be able to get into their zone can greatly impact the children's nervous systems getting to be back into that state of regulation that's going to reduce the impact of this toxic stress response that can have long-term implications for their life. As we've seen with the childhood experiences, I know myself, I've had 4 or more ACEs. That means that I'm more susceptible to many things. in life. But I also had protective factors. And I want to talk a little bit about that because all of you folks are the protective factors in people's lives. I don't think I have to go with this into great detail before I get to the positive child experiences, but we know that the more that we have, the more that it can impact us. And the first ACE study was only done with what's above the tree, mostly. And of course, we know there's many things that impact a family that also has adverse experiences for individuals that can cause a toxic stress response. But let's talk about positive childhood experiences. And so Dr. Christina Bethel, who's one of, who I just think is an amazing researcher, and she is looked at positive childhood experiences and the impact on them. So as much as we know that adverse childhood experiences can impact us through a lifetime, so do positive childhood experiences. And this can give children greater sense of well-being and help them create healthier relationships despite the hard things they're feeling in life. In addition to the positive experiences, children and adults can learn skills to strengthen their well-being, and even little ones can learn that. So what are the things that we know are helpful? And I think this is a new slide that I just made. I was so excited. I actually found this from the Meso Solutions, and I thought, oh, that's a really nice way to talk about positive childhood experiences because we can see it in images. It's being able to talk to your family about your feelings, feeling your family stood by you during difficult times, enjoying participation in community traditions, feeling safe and protected by an adult in your home, feeling a sense of belonging in high school, feeling supported by friends, having at least 2 non-parent adults who took genuine interest in you. Now, some of you may be looking at that and go, gosh, I don't know if I had many of those, or maybe, oh, I had that teacher. I had that person who really cared for me. Or when you're thinking about the parents that you're helping to maybe learn different kinds of strategies to improve their parenting, what you're helping them do may change the trajectory of their parenting, that you may be that person for them as an adult even that can help that child for the rest of that child's life. So what Christina Bethel, who's she's at Johns Hopkins, what her and her team suggested, that if we're doing assessments, and in many states now, California where I live, now it's a requirement that all primary care providers ask about ACEs. I know a lot of family physicians because I used to be a teacher of family medicine, and again, they get frustrated because once they identify that a family or a kid has many ACEs, they don't really have a lot of resources, and the resources are really impacted. But if you start to also identify positive childhood experiences, and let's say you say to a parent, oh, it sounds like you really enjoy those rituals in your faith community. That is a really good thing for you and your family, because that we know that helps children, even it helps children and adults, even if we're going through difficult times. So the other thing that I think this helps us look at, when you're a community that really cares about your little ones, as you all do, is also helps us think about what are some of the things that we can do to put into our community that can help with having more of these positive childhood experiences. Are there ways, for example, of bringing kids together that are having a hard time in high school, so they have a sense of belonging into something? And I think that high schools oftentimes do those kinds of things in community groups. But when you're thinking about little ones, I know that when I was a mom with little teeny ones, and I felt I had a lot of resources, but I didn't know how to take care of these kids because no one had ever given me, took a lot of Lamaze classes, but how do you take care of a baby? And new moms groups were really important. And I realize now, as I look back at that, those are some of the positive experiences I had that I think positively impacted my children. And I know that's some of the work that you all are doing, are creating those kinds of programs and that kind of support for families. Okay, so this is kind of what I'm really excited about, because I'm excited about how we change the trajectory of how we think about behaviors. And, sometimes there is this assumption that conventional thinking is that, that people are bad, or that kid's a bad kid. That kid's a bad seed. And maybe that kid comes from a really challenged family. And so sometimes some people tend to look at it that way. And that kid needs to be punished. And sometimes the punishment actually can can help to exacerbate some of the challenges the child is dealing with. And so we'll just say, well, what's wrong with that kid? Now, and I also want you all to know that I'm not saying, as we have this trajectory that I'm talking about, that there aren't real consequences for behaviors that need to be corrected. But that trauma-informed lens, of course, gave us an awareness that people are suffering, and we need to be aware of how trauma impacts a child and adult's mental and physical health. And that helps us as caregivers to think, okay, what happened to them? If I know this happened to them and they just lost their housing and they've just had a baby, how can I, as part of this community now, help that mom get into some at least transitional housing that's going to help support that child? And if we don't have enough in our community, what do we need to do with our policymakers if we're those kinds of advocates as well? But the resiliency informed in action is that people are resilient based on that definition that I gave you, and then they can learn how to cultivate skills of well-being to reduce suffering. And what are their strengths? What's right about them? And if we can get those strategies in the hands of children, how might that impact them? I mean, and their parents. It's children and parents. Like someone just had sent me, if I can find it, maybe I'll pull it up in my myriad of different things on my desktop. But it was about a 3-year-old teaching her 1.5-year-old brother one of our help now strategies in the community resiliency model when he was getting out of his zone. And you see this little girl going, okay, push against the wall with me. If we push against the wall, it's going to help you. And she does that, and you see them both take a deep breath. And so those are the kinds of things that I think are possible, but they also mean that there needs to be an awareness that we can teach these things in a simple way to help parents know this, that they can then teach it to their children. So you've heard me talk about the zones, and I'm going to move right into that now. And I'm going to talk to you about what we call the OK zone or the resilient zone. And this is kind of like what we're looking at. Are we in our zone or not? And, but I want you to know that all of us have a zone. Sometimes my zone is wider. Sometimes with life experiences, my zone can get a little bit narrower. It doesn't mean that it completely goes away, but maybe it doesn't take as much to bump me out of my zone when my zone is more narrow. But I want to talk to you about what that looks like, because the resilient zone is not like you're just chill and calm. Because some people say, oh, I'm in my zone. It really is the vitality of the human experience. So in your zone, you can be excited. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about this thing that just happened. Oh my gosh, I can be sad that this happened to my friend, or this happened in society, but I'm still able to think. I'm still able to express my feelings. I can be relaxed. I can be content. I can be tired. I can even be angry, because or even annoyed, but I'm not so angry or annoyed that I've lost my head or said things that are hurtful to others. So I may be able to express my feeling of being angry and saying, boy, when I'm treated this way, this makes me feel angry. And I'm still communicating and still able to do that, still with a compassionate stance, and not one where I'm just becoming this person that's bitter and negative. So I can be worried and happy. So, and during the day, and think about your day, like maybe, your days earlier in the morning today, maybe this has happened to you so far, or your day yesterday. We move through these different experiences of feelings within the day and our reactions. And so this is just the human experience. So being in our zone, I just want to be really clear, does not mean that we're all just chill. It just means that we can handle what life throws at us. But as we know, that's not always the case. So here's a thunderbolt that comes into life. It can be stressors. It can be those things that trigger the toxic stress response that we may be dealing with for a long time. It can be something that's like that tolerable stress that we've talked about. But when these stressors come in, that can be something that's actively new, or something that reminds us that's happened to us in our life, that instead of this nice rhythm of our resilient zone, we can get bumped into the high zone. We can feel edgy, panicky, angry. Oh my gosh, we can even say things that we regret and have to apologize for. But conversely, we can go to the low zone. And the low zone, we can feel depressed, exhausted. Oh my gosh, I don't even know if I want to go to work today, disconnected. And that we can go between these two states. So I'm just wondering, just think for a second, anyone besides me ever been into their high zone? I have. Have you been in your low zone? I've been there too. But thankfully, I know how to get back into my okay zone. And it helps me to know the skills that I'm going to share with you, because I use them all the time. And I think the people in my family and community, we've just learned to use the skills that help us get back to that better self, so that we can then, be more optimistic, that we can help with solutions, and that we don't leave the wake of kind of what happens when we're in the high or low zone. And the other thing I want to say about the high zone is that, when we're thinking about parents, and we're thinking about explaining this to parents, to new parents, and maybe even think of yourself, those of you that have parented. Were you ever in your high zone when you were parenting? I certainly was. And I remember I didn't know all these skills then. I would go into the bathroom and I would put the water on in the sink and I would listen to the water. I can remember my kids going, "Mommy, let us in." I would only stand there for a few seconds, but I knew that when I was doing that, I was calming myself down. Even though I didn't have the terminology then that I know now, but now I know with intention, we can help people understand what happens when they're in the high or low zone, help them be able to recognize it. And then if they're into that zone, how they can get back into their zone of well-being so they can parent their children better. And this also is true for those of you that may be teachers. I work a lot with teachers internationally, and there's lots of research that shows that if teachers are in that toxic stress response with kids, that also affects the nervous systems of children. So, I mean, this is why I said earlier, really everyone needs to know these skills. And we can teach them to teachers, to parents, and we can teach them to little ones too. People have taught them as young as 2 years old. Of course, 1.5-year-olds, when you think about pushing against the wall, depending on the child's able to walk at 1.5, which most kids are. There's something else I want to say about the zones. When we talk about them in the way that I'm talking about them right now, it's not pejorative, it's human nature. And so instead of kind of creating this shameful way of talking about behaviors, we're saying, this is the human condition. It's not good for you or your family to stay in the high zone or the low zone. But there are ways that we can talk together about helping you or helping your child. If you see that your child seems to be always in the high zone, to kind of start to uncover what may be happening to you that may be connected or not. We know there's sometimes kids just when they're not able to yet use their words, they get frustrated. If they're too tired, they can have a meltdown. But I think that oftentimes new parents, as we all know, we do much better teaching people how to drive cars than we do how to parent children, which is why I'm so excited to talk to all of you, because I know that you are very invested in helping parents and teachers and little ones. Okay, so what does it look like when kids are in the high and low zone? So I just have some things that you can see here. And this helps parents understand, so, it sounds like your child is getting into the high zone. So they're having some angry outbursts, or they're feeling kind of panicky about something or scared of something. They're irritable. Sometimes they get hyperactive. Sometimes they cry a lot or can have nightmares or night terrors. They can actually have regressive behaviors or increase in clinging behavior that also goes along with high zone. In low zone, daydreaming, sometimes inability to make friends, inattention, forgetfulness, shyness, tired, sad, depressed, limited emotional expressions. Sometimes kids who've had a lot of stuff that their eyes are really wide because maybe they saw something in the household or at school that scared them. Sometimes when children are in the low zone, and this is not just because it's cold outside, they can feel cold in their body. It's because they go into a physiological state that has to do with their vagus nerve that can make them feel chilly or cold all the time. So this is what it can look like. I've just wanted to give you some examples of what that may be like. So again, like I said earlier, no matter where the zone is, you can widen the zone, not only in yourself, but also help others to learn how they can widen their zone of well-being. Okay, so here are some common reactions, and I want to talk a little bit about these. So I have asked these questions all over the world. So what are the common emotional, physical, spiritual, thinking, behavioral, and relationship reactions that have happened when you've had a lot of stress or traumas in your life? And I'm not going to read everything in every bucket, but take a look at them for just a moment And you can see, like with emotional reactions, these are there's not an exhaustive list, but these are things that people commonly can have. Physical reactions as well. You can take a look at that. Spiritual reactions. There can be changes in their thinking. And also there can be behavioral reactions based on these stressful or traumatic events. And there also can be changes in relationships. And I think one of the important things that I've tried to help parents learn is that sometimes a child will have a behavioral change. And many of you, I know I'm talking to the choir, that there's something that may have happened in the child's life that sometimes the parent may minimize, not realizing that this was really difficult for the kid. And, I'll give you an example. I think I went to my first doctor's appointment when I was about 4 years old, and it was really a mean dentist. I always kind of would throw a little bit of a tantrum before my mom wanted to take me to the dentist. And I remember her saying to me, Elaine, that's for your good. It's for your well-being. Dr. Joseph is a nice dentist. Well, he might have been nice to her, but he wasn't nice to me. But you see, this is maybe what we'd say a little T trauma. But for me, it was a big T trauma because it really did impact me throughout my adulthood about really trying to avoid going to the dentist, which I have tons of crowns now, but I go regularly because I'm a really nice dentist. But I mean, that's just like a simple, example. So sometimes to uncover what that little factor may have been that changed a child's behavior can be very important to kind of tease out when you're working with parents of young ones. So, and this is, kind of like one of the cardinal rules is that for all of us, if we're dealing with challenging behaviors, apply your resiliency mask first. So learning skills to stay in your zone can help you and help you take care of your kids, and helping children to learn. And we'll be talking more about this, how to read their nervous system, how to know what the sensations of well-being are, and being able to tell the difference of when they're in distress and what to do about it can start quite early in terms of their learning, because we all live in the world of sensations. And I'll explain more about that in a little bit. So, but I want to go to this next one. So as well as there are common reactions that we just talked about, there's also what people call it post-traumatic growth or post-stressful growth. But I've also seen these all over the world. So what are the common emotional, physical, spiritual, thinking, behavioral, relationship reactions that have also occurred because of something that has been difficult to you, but because maybe you've reorganized your thinking and you think, well, even though this happened to me, I can now say that I have gratitudes, or that I am cultivating my well-being. And I, because this thing happened to me, I have greater appreciation. I have new meanings. Or gosh, what's happening in my body now that this, whatever event is over, or that you're talking to, let's say, a parent, and they're feeling heard. And you may even notice your whole body starts to relax, and there's a lightness, steady your breath. They can even feel their muscles start to relax. And they may notice that their behaviors are different, that they are expressing more generosity and kindness. And even in their relationships, that there's more connection and even healing some things that may have been difficult. And oftentimes I see people start to say, well, I can kind of forgive that person, or have more compassion and empathy, and maybe even have a renewed faith because I've come out of this thing and I've learned different skills that have helped me now to go forward in the future. So I think it's really important that as much as we're also designed for all those common reactions, we're also designed for this. But I think sometimes we forget what else is true. And that's why it's important for us to remember those things in our life and help others cultivate what else may be true in their lives that may help them, for example, be better parents. So how do we grow our well-being? It's not only what we think and what we feel, but it's also what we sense. And I'm going to be teaching you a lot about that in just a short period of time, because we're going to go into the skills of the community resiliency model right now. But I want to pause and I want to stop the share for just a second. And I want to see if anybody has any questions right now about the material that I presented to you. So anybody have any questions? And I'm just going to pause. And if you don't want to say them out loud, I don't know if you can unmute yourself. You can also just put them in the chat. So let me see if anybody has questions or not. Carolyn, do you have a question or comment?
No, you're doing great.
All right. I'm just checking. It's very strange when I can't see you all. So I don't know. So, okay, I will continue. But remember, I love questions. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the skills. And there's 6 skills in the community resiliency model. And you can see that tracking is in the beginning, in the middle, or in the center. And tracking is you use them with all the skills. And we have the skill of resourcing, grounding, gesturing, help now, and shift and stay. And we have time to learn all of them today, I'm hoping. So we're going to start with tracking. And we can see this little dog here sniffing. He's looking at tracks. And so what tracking is paying attention to the sensations in your body. Is the sensation pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? So this is one of the ways to know what zone you're in. And so it means paying attention to your body's signals. And we already do that. And I'm going to give you some examples of how you can also work with kids about this. But a sensation is a physical experience in the body. It originates in billions of receptors distributed into every part of the body. And what I've learned is that our life experiences, including our thoughts and feelings, have corresponding sensations within the body. And I work a lot with this with my granddaughter, because she actually lives in my house with her parents, with me. And so sometimes I'll ask her this question about things when she has this little stuffed animal called Biscuit. And sometimes if she's feeling a little out of sorts, I'm going, do you think we need to go get Biscuit? Biscuit is one of her resources. And so she'll go to get Biscuit. And I say, well, so tell me what you love about Biscuit. And she'll tell me that Biscuit, she loves to lay against Biscuit. And she uses sensory language. She goes, oh, Biscuit is so smooth, Nana. And I said, well, Madison, so where in your body do you sense a Biscuit inside? And she says, oh yeah, Biscuit is in my heart. Nana, Biscuit is right here. And she points to her chest. So, that's the kind of thing that in a very simple way, I'm not giving her a didactic presentation, but I'm working with her in little things in her life, because I know when I am helping her identify her resources, that if she gets bumped out, and how many children have we seen that their favorite blanket or their favorite stuffed animal, if they can't find it, how panicky they become? Because I know that's something that stabilizes them. It's not something that I want to take away from them. That's something I want to let them know that it's helping them to get back into their okay zone. So that gives you a simple example. But the other thing about this particular slide that I wanted to point out, notice in anger, what happens to the person's fist. You see how much energy is in the fist. But let me go back up. This was based on a study that was done in Finland. And what the researcher did, the individuals watched different videos and I think pictures, and then they were given just blank drawings of the body, and they were instructed to color in with the yellow and the red when they felt more activation in their body, and the black and the blue was when they felt less activation or decreased sensations in the body. And you can see with anger, the fists are like really almost looks like they're lit up. And so what do people often do when they're angry? They often, they hit others. We see children doing that, right? And that's can be very disruptive, as we know. So how do we work with that? One of the things that you can't talk to someone, in my experience, when they're angry about not being angry, but I can work with their sensory system. And I can say, oh, okay, let's go to your feet. Let's see if we can move our feet together right now. And so I'm using the sensory system, and all of a sudden, oh, my feet, and they're moving their feet. And all of a sudden you can see the intensity of the anger is diminishing. And then once that happens, the prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that is about our reasoning and about our consciousness, we can have a conversation even with little ones, saying, oh, when you get angry at when Johnny throws the truck at you, you got angry. And that's but we want to give them strategies of not to harm others, right? Because we're trying to model these behaviors that are more healthful for children. And oftentimes we've left the body out in terms of how the body can help regulate. And then we can have the cognitive conversations, the thinking conversations, to help little ones understand why, whatever the content of what led to the anger is, that help them understand with their consciousness in a different way. But I think this is a very important concept, to know that there are sensations connected to our thoughts and our feelings. And it's another vehicle to help children and parents and all of us learn to get back into their resilient zone. I will tell you for myself, when I'm getting into my high zone, my ears start to get red hot. It's almost like someone has put, like, I don't know, hot coals by my ears. But now I'm schooled enough to know when that happens, oh, I need to do a skill. And I usually do something which I will call grounding with my hand, like I might ground on a table and feel like the hardness, the coolness of the table, and swoosh, it's like I get back into my zone again. So I'm learning to read my nervous system, and that's what tracking is all about. So I put this in here because part of tracking, if we're helping little ones, and this was a little workbook that one of our CRIM teachers made, and she works in schools with little ones. But of course, she wants the child to also be able to identify a feeling. And even look at the furious one, you can see that there's a lot of warmth there. So when they're back into their zone again, we can also recognize that there's a feeling. And then we might even connect it. Why I'm feeling lonely, it's because my best friend moved, to a different part of the room, and I want to hold her hand, or whatever it might be, so that we are always connecting that, yes, we're using tracking and sensations, but sensations are connected to feelings. And I always want to let parents know that, and also help children begin to learn not only the feeling vocabulary, but the sensing vocabulary that's connected to identifying their feelings. All right, this is I just created this. It's a newer slide that I just created. When we can start telling the difference between sensations of well-being and sensations of distress, we then have a choice of what to pay attention to. And that can be really life-altering, like my hot ears, or when a child knows that, oh, every time I'm upset, I feel tightness in my muscles, and that they learn that there can be something they not only can do on their own, but that you can help them with initially, but they can have strategies to not only use their words, but also to start to use their sensory system to come back into that zone of well-being. So here's another one that we can work with kiddos. So this means pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So if we're working with children and helping them learn body literacy from early age, we can find out if, when, let's say, I'll use Biscuit for example, and I'll say, well, Madison, when you think about Biscuit, so is that sensation, is that something you like? I mean, I think you also have to tailor the language to the age of the child. Is it something you like or you don't like, or does it just feel okay? So it just depends on the child. And let's say Madison says, oh, it's really pleasant, Nana, and I feel it right here. So this is actually, she made this in a Google Doc, and you can actually pull it to right here. But again, you don't actually need to have a Google Doc. You can have gingerbread people, and you can even have little emojis. And children can learn to put the emojis onto their body in terms of how they're feeling on the inside, as you are also helping them identify the feeling response. You also can help them learn about sensations. And what we have found is what you pay attention to grows. So if we're always correcting children and always putting the attention onto the negative, and not also pointing out the well-being. And I mean, I learned this years ago. I remember I was in a collaborative preschool, and I remember the teacher was just wonderful. And I remember her telling us, Elaine, for every negative, you have to say 10 positives. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's a lot. But I think what she was getting to, what she had learned, and she had been doing that like for 30 years, that she learned that when you cultivate well-being in children, that grows in terms of how they see themselves and how they see their world. And that's the same thing with when we pay attention to our sensations of well-being. And so I know, for example, if I have a certain pain in my body, now that may be because I did too much, lifting or whatever, I can actually bring attention to another part of my body that feels better. And it actually will turn the volume down on the part of my body that's feeling distress. It may not take away the discomfort completely, but that's just kind of like a physical example of how that can be helpful. So with my granddaughter, when she, let's say she, how when little kids go, oh, I hurt my leg, and I fell over the chair, and I go, oh, I'm so sorry, Madison. Let's take a look and see if we need a Band-Aid. I said, well, and so whatever, we'll take a few moments to pay attention, of course, to what she's feeling. And then I'll go, well, Sarah, is there any place in your body that's feeling better than that knee? She goes, my other parts of my body are fine, Nana. And she and then she may start to move a little bit, and I'll move with her. And you can see her take a deeper breath, and she comes back into her zone. So again, these are simple things that some of you may already do, but there's things that we can do with more intention, knowing that we're paying attention to well-being. So I often say to people, because they go, okay, well, the sensory system, you already pay attention to that. I know that it gets pretty cold in Minnesota. I was talking to Carolyn about it today. She said, you guys had a long winter. So if you went outside on a really cold day when there's snow all over the ground and you went out with a tank top, would you be cold? Most likely. And so how would you know you would be cold? You would be reading your temperature. Now, when we read our nervous system, it also propels us with our thinking brain to take an action. So for most of us, I'm sure there's some people that would stay outside with their tank top. If I was out there with a tank top, I would go back in and get a coat. I might even get some gloves. And then I'm balancing my nervous system. And so now I'm feeling warmth, so I can go for my walk. And so that's how all of us, very simply, if it's too hot, I understand you've been having some hot weather up there. We've been having cool weather in California. But if it's too hot in Southern California and I'm going out with a coat, I take that coat off because it's going to disturb the balance within my nervous system. So I try to give parents very simple ideas about how we're already tracking, or think about how does, what we're doing with kids that are learning how to be potty trained, right? We're helping them learn to track their body signals and then to take the action. It takes them a while because when they're little, they don't have the developmental maturity yet to be able to use the potty, but eventually they will be able to do that. So we're helping children learn to read their body signals, and many of you already do that. And so we're just broadening that scope. We're helping them learn how to read the body signals that may be connected to being angry or being sad or being happy. And then also to then learn if they have unpleasant sensations, how they can bring their nervous system back into balance. Okay, so right now I'm going to ask you all to just bring your hands together and just rub them really fast. And faster, 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 giving you a real experience of this. And then pausing. And then you're going to be feeling heat right in your hands. And notice that heat. And it also, when you stop, it most likely is my hands are cooling down. My palms are cooling down. And that's an easy way to help people understand how to track. But the best way I have learned how to track. I want to just say one thing. So for some people, tracking sensations is not comfortable for them. And with any kind of strategies that we help people with, any kind of intervention, if people don't like learning how to read their nervous system, we just stop and say, okay, we can just talk about the things that that are resourceful for you. And that's kind of the next skill. Okay. Forgot about this slide. So just remember that many reactions to stress and trauma cannot be talked away, but they can be sensed away. Have you ever been really stressed out and someone said, just take a breath, take a breath? Sometimes that doesn't work either. Or if you try to say, calm down, but your nervous system has just gone out to town and it's not coming back. So it's just really important. I want to emphasize this. I said it earlier, that these stress symptoms are about your biology. You're not mentally weak. Okay. Yeah. So the best way to learn how to read your nervous system, in my experience, has been identifying your resources. And you already did that earlier on. So you see these folks are sitting around this table. And as you look at them, what might be resourceful for them? Take a look. I would say if I was me, I love pizza. Not everybody loves pizza. That would be a resource for me. Being with a group of friends would be resourceful for me. Having a nice drink on a cool day or having a hamburger might be resourceful for many of us. So basically, what we're doing with identifying a personal resource is then notice the sensations connected to that personal resource. Now, for example, I love the certain kind of pizza that it's just jam full of vegetables. I'm thinking about it right now, and actually I've started to salivate. Oh my goodness, I'm actually feeling a very pleasant, warm sensation, as if I had this pizza in front of me, which I don't. So this is also, we're working with the realm of bringing something to mind. And isn't it amazing the way we're designed, that we can call something up in memory and we can think about the different sights, smells, sensations connected to that resource. And we can track to say, oh, is that pleasant? Pizza's pleasant for me. And I can say, oh, I can notice that inside my body. Notice I just put my hand to my heart. And that was an automatic unconscious gesture that many people do when they talk about something that they really like, or that's something that is dear to them. So I'm also noticing that because that's also part of my sensory system. Okay, let's go on next. So let's talk about resources and what they are, because you already named some of them when I asked you those questions in the beginning. But resources are things we have in the environment like air, water, sunshine. They help us live well. Just like natural resources in our world, each of us, has our own personal sense of resources that help us live a fuller life and get back into that. And it can help us when we're bumped out to get back into our okay zone. So a resource can be something real or imagined. It can be a supportive person. It can be a place, an idea, a favorite sport, an animal, family, a game, your faith, a movie, a singer, a TV show, music, prayer. I was in Atlanta, Georgia not long ago. Well, I guess it was long ago because it was before the pandemic. I think it was my last in-person training. And there was a Baptist minister who was there. And the second day of the training, he came up to me and says, Elaine, I just have to share a story with you. He goes, when I'm thinking about my resources, what I realized my resource is the Lord's Prayer. He says, I've said that prayer every day of my life since I was a child. He said, but I never, before you suggested it, sensed what it was like when I was saying the words. I felt such a close relationship to my God that in a way that was a bit deeper than I felt before. And I never thought about paying attention to the sensations connected to saying that prayer. So that gives you an example that when we think about those resources, or if we're doing it in real time, like he was, how that sensory experience of something that was a well-traveled resource for him, but when it was sensed, it expanded his well-being. So we're going to do an exercise in just a little bit, but oftentimes, I would say not oftentimes, but every now and then, when we name one of our resources, that also can induce a sense of sadness. I often talk about my grandma. She was just the most loving person, and she always made me feel that I was just right, just the way I was. She was that family member that I knew that listened to me. And I can, as I'm thinking about her, I'm thinking about her beautiful brown eyes and just how loving she was. And that brings me a great sense of warmth, but also I can also feel a little etching of sadness because she's not on the planet with me any longer. So I can't also embrace her in the way that I used to. So then I can say my resource can bring me sadness. And sometimes tears come, but I've learned to just embrace those tears, because those tears are about some of the love I've had in my life. That yes, it may be different now, but I can still shift and say, oh, but she used to make me pancakes that looked like Mickey Mouse, and we made lemonade from the lemon tree from her backyard. And that becomes then more pronounced. And then that doesn't take away the fact that she's still a resource for me, even though there's sadness that can be etched in kind of the tapestry of my memory of her. So just know if that happens when you do the exercise, you're perfectly very normal if that occurs. I just notice the little tears if that happens when I'm thinking about a resource that may have many natures. Okay, So we're going to do this exercise right now. So if you have a piece of paper in front of you, I encourage you to get it, and to get a piece of a pen or a pencil to write on. But if you don't have a piece of paper or a pen or a pencil, you can just think about these things. So I want you to think about something that gives you a feeling of calm, joy, peace, or comfort. It can be a memory, a person, a place, an animal, an activity, or something about yourself that gives you strength or peace, uplifts you. So take one thing and then describe it to yourself. You can write it down if you have something to write it with. Just like you heard me talk about my grandma. Brown eyes, unconditional love, pancakes, lemonade. I think I can smell the lemonade. This is called resource intensification. And this is important because neuroscientists have let us know that you need to pay attention to that for about 12 to 15 minutes, seconds rather, not minutes, for the sensations to get really embedded within your nervous system, for it to shift into greater sensations of well-being. So as you think about this resource and the descriptors, I'm going to invite you to notice what happens on the inside. And invite you to notice sensations that may be pleasant or neutral. And if there's unpleasant sensations that come up, you can bring your attention to some place in the body that feels better, or just, open your eyes and look around the room and find something that catches your attention and bring your awareness outside of your body. So stay with those pleasant or neutral sensations for a few seconds, and then continue to notice what happens on the inside. Now, one of the things that some of you may notice is when I was thinking about my resource during the exercise, I took a deeper spontaneous breath and then I yawned. And yawning is part of the release of the autonomic nervous system. So if there was some residual tension in my body, the yawning actually released it. And there's many really important studies about the benefits of yawning. It actually reoxygenates the brain, can actually make us feel more awake. But it's so nice to know that we're also designed that when we see other people yawning, that yawning can be very contagious. Kind of like we have this embedded way to be in community to help one another come into a more balanced state. Oh, just yawn 2 more times. There we go. So what I'd like to invite you to do, those of you that would like to, is to put into the chat your resources, that the resource that you identified, and if you noticed any sensations that were pleasant or neutral, and maybe to name them. So I'll put mine in grandmother. Yeah. I could feel my muscles relax too, even deeper. So let's see if anybody else would like to put in their resource and what they noticed. Maria shared, the lake I live by, listening to the birds, slowed my breathing. See if anybody else would like to share. My mom, warm, but sad, yeah. So Vienne, just notice the warmth. Anyone else? Canoeing on a remote lake, the breeze on my face, the smells in the air, calmness, peace. What happens for many of us as we hear maybe me reading these out loud, or if you've had a similar experience, I have never canoed in a remote lake, and yet, Linda, I imagined it. And I also felt almost I could feel the breeze, and calmness and peace within myself too. What also happens when we work with this arena of resourcing, that it seems to spread to others as well. And that's where, when you're working in a community, you're working, let's say, with a group of parents, you could actually do this in a group exercise as you're gathered around in a circle, having a handout on doing this. Connie shared spending time with an adult son, pride, joy, inner smile. And when we talked about this with little ones can also identify the resources. We may have to use our language differently because they may not know what a resource is. We can ask them what they like, what they love, if there's a special toy. I know that many times, those of you that are in preschool, early childhood development, have children bring in their favorite little stuffed animal or blanket. I know my granddaughter, who just graduated from first grade, they got to bring in a special thing the last day of school. But also what they did is they would have pajama day at her school. And I knew that the pajama day that was always a favorite day for Madison. There was something about wearing her comfy pajamas to school that was really wonderful for her. I know there's many ways that you cultivate these kinds of things already in the work that you do. But I guess what I'm saying is with intention. And again, when we're working with little ones, we can have a little gingerbread person and have them point to where they notice the sensations that are of well-being in their body. And we're helping them learn body literacy, just like we hope that they will learn to read and write. Okay, so that is tracking and resourcing. So I am going to continue. And we have a word for people that like our skills, and we call them CRIM guides. And, we have a training program where you can become a certified CRIM teacher, but, that's a small group of people compared to all the people we train around the world to be CRIM guides. And that's taking a workshop like this and saying, oh, I'm learn some skills that I'm going to use for myself, and I can share them with others. And when we share these kinds of skills, like if you think I'm going to share these with the parents in our school, we do that without judging. We listen carefully. And also it's important that if we're going to talk to them about resourcing and tracking, that we not talk too quickly, sometimes softening our voice, and give time for the person to notice the sensations that are happening on the inside. And of course, we always want to be aware if someone seems sad or upset and giving support. But we have lots of CRIM guides in many places around the world. So CRIM guides also can conversationally interweave skills when talking to someone who may be stressed out or feeling down. We call this conversational crimming or conversational resourcing. So the CRIM guide can ask those questions we asked in the beginning. What or who helps you get through hard or stressful times? Or when did you know you were okay? Or What or who helps calm you or helps you during difficult situations? But I think we can also bring this to the, asking them about children if they're feeling frustrated because their child's reacting in a certain way. We can say, well, can you tell me a time when your son or didn't do that? And what were you doing then? And what do you think was different about that compared to now? And sometimes that illuminates, the kinds of things that maybe the parent hasn't been doing as much, or also illuminates kinds of things that may have changed that can be something that you as the parent crim guide can be helpful to help have that conversation. So the parental crim guide may say, I'm here. So when I talk about the parental crim guide, if we're teaching this to parents, and we want the parents to be teaching this to their kids, so they're called the parental crim guide may say, I'm here now with you, sweetie. You're safe now. You're okay. Why don't you come and sit on mom's lap and let's rock a little bit? Or where's Biscuit? Let's bring Biscuit with you and we can rock. So those are the ways that we're soothing and we're having those moments of experiences that are helping to synchronize that relationship between the parent and the child that we know can help with their nervous system. And, we can also help the parent know that when we do that, that their nervous system, when they're taking a deeper breath, can also be helping their child, even if their child is a little bit more, even when their child is crying, it may take a little bit of time for that child to soothe. But that is something that is helping them that can also be helpful eventually to the child. Of course, there's different strategies that we can do with babies if they're crying and they're not stopping. But I think, I can remember one time with my son when he was first born, was my oldest, and I was just trying every which way to get him to quiet, and he wasn't. My mom walks through the door and she goes, oh, give him to me. She immediately took him and he immediately quieted down. And now I know it's because she was calm and I was not. And so, these kinds of illustrations, are possible for us to get back into our resilient zone, just even by doing some of these simple strategies that we're talking about. You're going to be hearing my dogs in the background for just a moment because I think someone's coming to my door, so I apologize for that. Okay, let's keep going. All right. So I also want to talk a little bit about loss. This just happened. Actually, we just did a training for parents at the Covenant School in Nashville, where there was just sadly the shooting that just happened. And I certainly hope that doesn't happen to your community. But these were, all grade school kids and actually very little ones as well. And so one of the questions that came to us, is how do you help children that are grieving? Children can grieve for all sorts of reasons and not for the cataclysmic thing that school just experienced. But I also can say that, when children lose a pet, that can be, a memory that maybe some of you have, I certainly do, of one of the big first griefs of my life. And how do we help children with that? So we also can not shy away from talking about it. And that's what I think I've learned the most is that, when we think about, let's say we just use the example of a pet, when you think about Skippy and the things that, what did you like to do with them? And, bringing those kind of resourceful memories back. And, how would you like to remember Skippy so that we always know that we have that picture? Do you want me to put that picture by your bed? Because it's not removing the images of the person away or the animal away from them. It's having the integration of that person now that they've been passed into their present. And so one of the questions, for example, is when something happens, when someone dies, and it's a person. I worked with a school where their preschool teacher had passed. What can we create in our house or at the school or in our church to always remember how much we love them and they meant to us? Now, again, it's going to depend on the developmental age of the child, but we also, with little ones, we can say, well, let's draw a picture of how much we love Miss Susan and what she meant with us. Those kinds of things can be ways that you can engage children when there's been grief and sadness. And we call that's really conversational crimming. And that's being a guide on how we can work with these difficult things that happen in all of our lives. Okay, let's see how are we doing with time. Oh, we're doing good. So I want to talk a little bit more about the biology. I'll call this key concept 2. And that is the model is based on the human nervous system, like I've already talked about. And so when you have really wonderful seasons, I understand in Minnesota, oftentimes in California, we have either summer or we have spring, but we did have a winter this year. But I think the reason why I talk about nature is because the things that happen in nature also can happen in our body. And when we've had a lot of things that have been disruptive to us, we can just only feel and notice the discomfort and the pain in our bodies and not the well-being. And when we think about little ones, they often somaticize, right? They may say, oh, my tummy hurts, when something in their life is happening to them that they don't have the words for. So one of the very simple ways, and oh my goodness, I've done this so much with Madison and with other little ones, is that, of course, we want to talk to them about what's going on in their life. I said, well, is there any place in your body that's not hurting right now? That same question. Oh, my arms are fine. I mentioned that earlier. That's such a simple way to, again, to help to learn about the differences but in the storms that happen in our body and also the well-being, because just as we have the inclement weather in nature, we also have the beauty of when the spring comes, right? And we can feel the lightness and the well-being, and those kinds of things happen in our bodies as well. So CRIM is based on neuroplasticity. And the things that I've been talking about have to do with our lifelong capacity of our brain to change and to rewire itself. I often call this the hope of the nervous system. So if we've had a lot of things that have happened to us in our life, and this is so important with little kids, if we can start teaching this to them when they're little, that they can start having this pathway that's connected to that toxic stress and the trauma, where they don't know there's a break of the nervous system. So that when we give them some simple skills, just like what we've talked about so far, that it can help them have their nervous system come back into balance, but it also can help all of us if we've had the things that have happened to us, and also, of course, the parents that you would work with. So neurogenesis is the ability to create new neurons and connections between neurons throughout a lifetime. And I think it's really important because I remember first going to those ACEs conferences, and I'm going, oh no, I better go to the doctor right away. I have 4. And they showed us the pictures of the brains of kids that had ACEs. And I'm thinking, oh gosh. But I also, at that time, they weren't talking about the positive child experiences. So I think that's what CRIM does. It remembers what else is true and helps to cultivate what else is true. Again, not running away from the stress or the trauma, but also saying we can cultivate our well-being as well, and we can create new pathways. And so in the literature, there is 2 terms that neuroscientists use. It's called tuning and pruning. And I want to talk a little bit about this because this is so important, even for little ones, for all of us. So positive experiences can change the actual structure of the brain by increasing the number of connections between neurons. And the neurons that are firing together, I just had, I have a talk show on Voice America called Resiliency Within. And I just had this wonderful presenter, neuroscientist, who made neuroscience so simple. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I love talking about it. But he talked about, his name is Dawson Church. He did this thing because we also did it live on Facebook Live, and he brought his hands together like this, and he's going, and these neurons, they find each other, and when we spend that time cultivating our well-being, they go, they connect. Neurons that fire together, wire together, and they create new neuronal pathways. And so it's just like in nature, right? If you go to a beautiful meadow, and let's say everybody goes to a certain pathway, it starts getting well and worn, and you know that you can go that pathway and you're not going to be stepping on the high grass, right? And so the more that we pay attention and we cultivate that, the stronger those neurons get, because we're tuning the well-being in our nervous system. And we can start doing that for little ones, right? Those positive childhood experiences, even if they're growing up with difficulties. And so what happens with the concept of pruning that you may have also already heard about, but the neural connections that aren't used weaken and often disappear. And that's called the use it or lose it principle. But with the pruning, right, if you have a well-worn pathway of, let's say, negative thinking or just feeling so much distress all the time in your body, and you start paying attention to the positive experiences and really with intention, doing it as a practice, it changes us. And so, for example, some schools will have, they'll have a whiteboard, and each child has their own little face on a magnet. And so they'll have the high zone, low zone, and okay zone. And so children get to put on, when they come in to the classroom, they put where they are in and how they may change during the day. And so that becomes like the barometer too for the teacher to look at. Oh goodness, and we can even say it out loud. How many people are in their okay zone? Anybody out of their zone and in their higher low zone? Because see, it's not pejorative. So it's not like, oh, if I say this, that means there's something negative. Go, okay. So if you're in your higher low zone, well, maybe we can try thinking about one of those things that make us feel better, like one of our resources. And there's other ones we're going to talk about in just a little bit. The help now strategies can be really helpful in bringing those things out when people are out of their zone. But anyway, we want to start tuning those positive experiences. And if we just talk briefly about the brain, this is a simplistic version. The brain is much more complex with that, but we have the thinking brain. And you've heard me say a number of times when our prefrontal cortex is offline. And that's what I'm talking about right here in this yellow circle. So that prefrontal cortex, if we are in a states of distress, that can happen. We go into our survival network, and some of those responses can be those, fight, flight, and freeze, where, a child is fighting with another child, or they're doing things where they're running out of and running down the hallways rather than being in the classroom. Or they've just stopped and they can't move. And you're saying, can you hear me? Are you listening to me or not? I am talking to you. Well, they may not be able to hear you because their prefrontal cortex has gone offline, because this emotional network of the brain, which has the amygdala, which sounds the alarm that something could be dangerous, gets cued and then has sparked. It has a response that triggers that survival brain. So it's really important for teachers to know about this, because sometimes you think a child is just purposely not paying attention, but their brain may be so activated with that amygdala being firing, that their prefrontal cortex is not online very much. So that's why doing the skills that help them get into their okay zone, at least while they're in school, will give them hopefully greater agency and empowerment, so that their prefrontal cortex can make those decisions that make better decisions about how they operationalize. What are we doing with little ones too that are in that preschool area, developmental age? They can be pretty, they're reactive because their brains are growing and they're learning how to have more self-control, all those kinds of things. And we see children that are in the range of those sometimes being really stuck in their higher low zone. Remember with the zones that all of us go into those zones, but it's when we get stuck in them is when it becomes problematic. And that's when we can have, depression or anxiety conditions that can lead to really a lot of distress in our life, right? Okay, let's just go. Okay, so when I talked about the nervous system, and I'm going to talk about it now with a little bit more detail. So the sympathetic prepares us for action, and the parasympathetic prepares us for rest. So when we are in that high zone state, it can be a hyper arousal state. That's when the sympathetic is in action. So our breathing rate may go up, our heart rate, the tense muscles. And when that happens, our digestion and saliva are not needed, because it's really meant for action. Some of us get stuck there, and that's that toxic stress response, right? Where you get stuck into a state where your gas is on the pedal 24/7. So what we're doing with the CRIM skills is helping everyone know they have a break, which prepares us for rest. And some of you have already experienced that, right? A deeper breath when you're on the lake canoeing, that's the break of your nervous system. And if you're having a lot of distress and you're feeling like, gosh, I just can't get out of it, it just seems it's on me, you can start bringing some of those skills in, and with practice and with more practice, it becomes more immediate in terms of putting that break on. And I always often think, what if we could teach every child when they're in preschool that they have a break of their nervous system, and how that may change them as they go through whatever life experiences they have, which we know, being human, will be many, and that they can learn that they can have that capacity to self-regulate. So we're really talking about working with the system, which is biological. All right. So these are just kind of points I want to say. Having a lot of hard things in your family or community does not mean you will develop health problems. I think that we need to also say that when we're talking about ACEs, because I don't want to spread fear, because I also want to let people know that there are ways that we can become healthier and that we can learn to sense, and notice sensations in our body, and most importantly, be able to shift our attention and learn how to learn greater regulation skills. Okay, third skill, and this is grounding. And grounding is just simply noticing how the body is supported by the ground or something else like a chair or the wall in the present moment. So grounding helps us be more present and that we can feel safer in the here and now. So it's really that attention practice of mindfully being now and not out in the future or in the past. So we can also ground, not just with sitting in a chair, we can ground with our hand, like I already mentioned. We can ground standing up. I've worked with a lot of people in law enforcement and veterans. They don't like, so many of them don't like to not be against a wall because they want to see the perimeters of where there's exits. And when you can help people know that there's options, that also is helpful in helping them know how they can ground. So remember, this is about gravitational security, because many children, for example, if they're growing up in homes where there's lots of trauma, they may never feel like they're solid in space. Some of the research that was done by many occupational therapists is some children feel like the world's spinning all the time. So if we can help them be more grounded when they're little, they can learn that they can be in the present moment. So sometimes for some children, if we just kind of bring their attention, if let's say they're sitting in the chair and they're sitting in a circle and we're trying to get them to ground, they may not be able to ground without something on their lap, because some children need like a little weighted cushion or blanket or a little weighted stuffed animal for them to feel like their feet are connected to the ground. Honestly, I've had so many adults tell me that since childhood, they always felt they were floating. And when I do a deeper dive into what's happened to them, oftentimes there are a lot of things that happened to them in their childhood that were very traumatic, and the body was never brought in. So there's something so powerful to know when you can be stationary. I've also worked a lot with gone to earthquake zones, and many times people never feel like the earth is still, and having something weighted on their lap or on their feet when they're doing a grounding exercise can be very helpful for them. So right now, what I'd like to do is take you all through a grounding exercise. And so I'm going to invite you to get in a comfortable position. I can't see you all, so you can get into any position you want. You can lay on the ground if you want. Continue sitting in a chair, stand up against a wall, whatever you'd like. And I would invite you to just notice how your body is making contact with the surface right now. And you can keep your eyes open or closed, whichever is more comfortable for you. Sometimes it helps to soften your gaze. You'll know what's best for you. So as you notice how your body is making contact with a surface, I'm going to invite you to notice how your back is positioned. And just be aware of your back. And also noticing how your arms and hands are in whatever position they may be in. And bring attention to your lower back. And notice how your seat may be making contact with the seat of a chair or the floor, the wall, whatever way it's making contact. And notice your legs. And your knees going down to your ankles. And then paying attention to your feet. And noticing how your feet are making contact to a surface if they are. And so I'm going to invite you to notice what's happening on the inside. Do you notice any changes in your heart rate, in your breathing, in your muscle relaxation? And draw your attention to places on the inside that are more pleasant or neutral. And for any of you that may be noticing discomfort in your body, which sometimes happens when we ground, I'm going to invite you to draw your attention to someplace on the inside that feels better, a little bit less uncomfortable or less painful. And see if there's a change. And also know that if any time you'd rather not peek on the inside, you can just bring your attention to someplace outside and in the environment that you're in. So just take a moment more to notice pleasant or neutral sensations. And if your body wants to move in any particular way, just allow your body to move in whatever way it wants to. And when you're ready, come back to our space. And you're invited, if you'd like to, let me know what sensations you may have experienced as you did our grounding exercise. I know I noticed a greater muscle relaxation. I get to do this with you. So if anyone would like to, put into the chat, you're please welcome to do so. I've got my chat open. But I'm going to now just talk to you about grounding like a tree. And I'm not going to take you through a grounding like a tree exercise, but basically one of the ways to work with little children is to have them imagine being a tree, and they can be any tree they would like to be, and have them pay attention. If they're standing or sitting, they can even be a sitting tree, and have them pay attention to how their feet are making contact to the ground, and invite them to have branches that are reaching out towards the sky, and help them be more body aware by imagining themselves as their favorite tree. It's a very simple exercise. Some of you may do it already, but that's one of the ways to work with grounding with children. Some children and adults who've experienced physical or emotional trauma may have difficulty with the skill of grounding. So again, if grounding is unpleasant, they can stop at any time. All right, we're going to move into the next skill, gesturing. And gesturing wasn't always a skill, but it did get moved into a skill mode, because what I've noticed as I work with people around the world, children and adults, is that people tend to make certain movements when they're talking about things that give them joy, or when they're peaceful or calm or excited. And people are all a little bit different. I mean, I don't want to prescribe to do a certain gesture, but it's more important to find out what may be soothing to each one of us. So a gesture is a movement of the body, or the arms or legs that expresses a feeling or helps you to communicate an idea. Many gestures made by humans happen automatically, and they're underneath conscious awareness. Like I made one when I was talking about pizza, of all things, and I put my hand to my heart. But oftentimes I've seen really a dearness of when people do that. When I said, I just noticed you put your hand to your heart. Is that comforting? And most times people will say yes. And so when we start paying attention to self-soothing gestures, the gesture is often calming and can help us return to our resilience zone. And when we pay attention to movements that express joy, courage, or power, we can move back to our resilience zone. So, I mean, I think that I've done this with kids, which can be so much fun. But kids often have favorite super heroes. And if you think about sometimes the poses that superheroes make, sometimes I'll even say, can you think about your favorite superhero? And what's the movement that they make? And kids will go like this. They'll make all sorts of movements. I go, well, what happens inside? And people go, I'm strong, like my superpower. So again, these are ways that we can bring this to children to help them experiencing their body and the movements that are so important. And I imagine many of you do this already. But I think that what I've found is the self-soothing gesture. And I want to talk a little bit about this. And I want to talk about one movement that is very common, and that is the fast-moving leg. Maybe some of you have that fast-moving leg. I have seen that all over the world. And what I've noticed about the fast-moving leg is oftentimes there's a lot of tension in that person's body that needs to be released somehow. And the leg does that. Now, what happens for many of us that see that fast-moving leg, we might say, stop that, or that's annoying. So I don't do that. I say, oh, well, your leg is moving. Let that energy come out. Notice your leg and how it wants to move. And so they still could be sitting in a chair, but what tends to happen is the leg moves and then it slowly starts to release, and then it stops. Now, I encourage you to notice this. I have had so many adults in my courses. I had one, I can remember just this young man started crying. He said, ever since I was little, every teacher I've ever had told me to stop moving my leg. It always made him feel so abnormal. And when I just said to him, I go, oh, just move the way your leg wants to move. He just felt there was a certain like lumber that had been on him for his whole life that was just dissipated. He's now one of our teachers of CRIM, and it really shifted him. So sometimes these movements have very important, they serve the nervous system to release some of the tension that may be inside some of us as little ones and as adults. But one of the things that I want to encourage you all to think of right now, is there a movement or a gesture that you make that soothes you? I happen to do one where I put my thumb on top of my other thumb and I just stroke my thumb. I do it like this. I think I've done it since I was little, but it wasn't until I really started paying attention to these elements that soothe us. My daughter, she's a hair twirler. She twirls her hair. And that also is self-soothing. Many of us have been told, stop twirling your hair. But I'm going to encourage you to think about gestures and movements as sometimes the self-soothing movements and gestures that we always have with us, that sometimes people don't even know that we're doing. Like I can do that thing with my thumb underneath the table if I'm feeling out of sorts, and it can immediately help me get back into my zone of well-being. My new book just came out on building resilience to trauma. And I asked one of the teachers that I know if she could give me an example. And she said she was working with a group of children, and she was asking children what if they had a movement or a gesture. And this picture of this woman in the middle that looks a little sad. The little boy said he liked to sit on the floor and wrap his hands around his knees and rock, and that made him feel calmer. And so she said, oh, well, that's perfect. That's exactly what I want to invite you to do if you need to feel calmer in my classroom. And then he said to her, he said, well, how come Principal Smith told me, I'm using, of course, different words, different names. How come Principal Smith told me I shouldn't do that? And so her response to him was that, well, Principal Smith hasn't learned about these self-soothing movements yet, and we're going to teach him about them. So, I mean, I think that gives you an example. That little boy knew that there was something he did to calm himself. And so I'm just really hoping to encourage you to start thinking about that. Now, also, there can be movements of joy, and there can be the exercise of saying, hey, what if we all just did right now, if we were going to be joyful, what would joyful look like in our body? And that can be an invitation that you can do with an entire room of people, and then invite them to notice what's happening on the inside. now I put the movement, I think, of courage from the Black Panther in here, because I thought, oh my gosh, that is an amazing movement that now is all over the world. And I don't know if you've seen kids as they've when the Black Panther's courage has come up, and that you see kids in a whole school do that Black Panther movement, because it has meaning to the body as well. So I'm just going to encourage you to open up your perspective about, identifying first. And this is, we're going to do a little exercise. I'm going to invite you to think about your self-soothing gesture. And to do it right now. Can't see it, but to notice what happens on the inside as you make that movement or gesture. I just did mine. There's that deeper breath. So notice those sensations in your body that you may have taken a deeper breath. You may have noticed muscle relaxation. Oftentimes when they do ultrasounds in the womb, they see babies making certain movements. Many children are already sucking their thumb, that we know is self-calming. So that many of these movements we sometimes have made since we were in the womb. So here's some pictures of one of the teachers that works with us in her classroom with kids, and she was able to get permission for the two kids in the picture of these different movements that we sometimes make that emphasize a meaning and gesture. And again, this was something where there was an exercise of the children identifying which ones were their favorite ones, to remind them that they could do this for themselves. Okay, so the help now strategies, skill number 5. Oh, we're coming to an end. We still have 10 minutes. Okay. The help now strategies is probably what teachers tell me around the world that are the most helpful. And they're to use when we get way out of our resilient zone, if we're stuck in the high or low zone, and they can be done anywhere, anytime. I have many teachers that have a poster like this in their classroom. So it could be, can I get you a glass of water? Oh, can we listen for a second to the sounds inside or outside the room? Depending again on the developmental age, counting down from, 5, 10, or 20, or just even counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for little ones. Going for a walk, noticing our feet as they're hitting the ground, naming 6 or more colors around your space, noticing the temperature inside or outside, touching something inside or outside and noticing the sensation. Is it smooth? Is it rough? This is probably the one that I told you about, the little boy, but probably one that many people use around the world. Pushing hands or back against the wall tends to get rid of a lot of that energy if you're in the high zone, or bring somebody back up into the okay zone if they're in the low zone, or just paying attention to the surroundings in your room and noticing what catches your eye. So these are the help now strategies, and they can be done with, again, pictures in different parts of the school or a home. I know that I was working, there was a person that worked on one of the Pasquayaki tribe, and she was in charge of the children's programs. And so all the children would make their own little booklet with their favorite help now strategies. And so that would be something that they could turn to if they were getting out of their zone. So there's ways that you can reinforce this. But essentially what we're doing with the help now strategies is helping the nervous system get back into its balanced state. So this is the last skill. And I've actually already mentioned this as we've gone along, but we're tracking our sensations, let's say, that are connected to being in the low zone. And maybe the feeling is sad and the sensations are numb. So if you can know that those are what you're working with in the low zone, then what can you do to bring yourself back into your resilient zone? You can think about a resource, do any one of the skills that we've talked about, track the sensations connected to that skill to be able to, with intention, come back into your resilient zone. So to me, shift and stay is the skill that we're really using to integrate all the skills into our activities of daily living. Because then once we can do that, then again, any sensation that we're having, we can begin to understand that that's there. We can take action. It can change our behavior. And also then we can identify the feelings that went along with that experience. So here we are, there's someone in the high zone, and they were able to get back into their resilient zone. And in this case, they were in a very, looks like meditative state as they did theirs. Oh, Sarah, thank you for putting that in here. Pushing and pulling is a helpful way for kiddos who have had the heavy sensory need to get them self-regulated. This is also, yeah, thank you. So those movements, aren't they? They're amazing. And I always often think about too, when we can suggest it, or when kids start doing it themselves, they're learning to do something for themselves. It's not shameful. In one of the kindergarten classrooms, the teacher made a resiliency cape, and she hung it on the wall. And when she would teach these kinds of strategies, she would tell the children who would like to put the resiliency cape on today as we're learning about a new skill. So what the children learned was that if they were out of their zone, what happened, this happened kind of spontaneously. She didn't know this was going to happen. So it was hanging on a hook in the classroom. And so when one child would see another child out of the zone, they'd go get the resiliency cape and said, do you need the resiliency cape right now? And just that compassionate, empathic gesture for some children was enough to bring them back into their zone of well-being. I just love that story. Okay, so here's some ideas that you can do in classrooms as a treasure box of wellness skills. You can either have pictures of them for little ones that can't read yet about what their favorite skill might be. And they have, kids come with their own resources too. It could be swimming, it could be anything that they can also, you can put them in the treasure box in your classroom or in your home, pull them out and say, okay, what if we tried Johnny's, he loves to jump up and down, whatever it may be. It can be anything. So that particular child may do that, or sometimes you can get a whole group of children doing something together. So you can make a treasure box of the wellness skills. Now I'm going to go through this part because I don't think, but implicit and explicit memory just means that when we're working with the model, we're also working with implicit memory, which is the memory that's held in the body. But I want you all to know that really, I think all these skills can be in the palms of your hand and in the palms of children's hands, where they can definitely use these skills into their activities of daily living. Now, we don't have one for children yet, but I'm working on it. I got to get a big grant, but we do have the iChill app. It's free and it's in English, Spanish, and we have this Ukrainian project that was able to get Ukrainian funding. So you can do these skills that I've just led you through, and you can do it on your own time. And many people download the app and listen to them, because when you start doing this as a practice, really within a short time, your body can start tuning pathways of well-being, and sharing this with the families that you work with can also be something that can be helpful for them. So this was another thing that came out of IFS. I didn't mention her name, Inez Tiger, who is one of our CRIM teachers, but 3 things I can do to help myself feel better. And notice that she has all the different things that are the things we've already gone over, that they, again, this is interactive where they can put it into their box, but see how simple some of these things are that you can help children with. And then you yourselves can have your favorite playlist. What's your top 3 resources? What's your favorite way to ground? Your top 3 ways, top 3 help now strategies, and who's a friend or a family member to reach out to when stressed, and what are your self-soothing gestures. You can do this for yourself, and you can also encourage parents to do this for themselves. And so, finally, practice the skills. The more you pay attention to it, the more you'll expand your well-being. Download the app, work on it. Know that we have research that's being done around the world about our models, not only with children, but with adults. We can now say that we're evidence-based. If you want to go to our TRI website, all the research is mentioned there, but it has found to be statistically significant improvements in well-being and reductions in depression and anxiety. These have been done on adult populations, but there's some new research that will be published from working with children in a school in Sierra Leone by ADRA International. So that's some more that's just there. Here's my book if you want to read it. It has 2 chapters on working with kids that One was written by Dr. Kim Freeman, who's a child psychologist. The other one was written by Kim and Susan Reedy and myself. Susan Reedy is like the Pied Piper of working with kids. And we have a whole section on all these different activities that are laid out in the book. If that's something that you would like to look at. We've been all over the place. What can I say? And if you want to contact me, here's my personal email. And you also can send a, you can also go to our website to learn more about our work that we do all over the world. So thank you for having me. My goodness, I cannot believe this, Carolyn. I'm completely on time.
There's always a first time for that.
There could be first times for that. Absolutely. Yes. Anyway. So, anyway, thank you so much for having me. And, I just remember what else is true. I always end my talk show this way, because it really does help. I know it helps me. I'll end with a little story, personal story. My husband has been diagnosed with cancer. We hope he's in remission. He's one of, Norwegian extraction that was supposed to be living in Minnesota, but he's been living in California his whole life. So he got melanoma. But anyway, he's having immunotherapy actually now, but he was having his surgery. So we're sitting in the hospital and he is so nervous, but he was doing his self-soothing gesture. He does this one, but he was doing it slowly. I mean, he was not doing it slowly. He was going like this. And I'm going, oh, I think he's out of his zone. But of course, I'm not going to say that, Tim, because he'd probably get mad at me, right? But I'm noticing him because we learn to track our family members when we learn this stuff. So he's tracking. And I know he's nervous. He hates hospitals. So I turned to him and I just said, I just was thinking about something, honey. I don't know why this came to my mind. This is called conversational resourcing. I said, do you remember, we've been married for 49 years. I said, do you remember the time we went to Lake Tahoe when we were first married? We had no money. We stayed in a tent and we went to the top of that mountain and we looked down at the lake. And he stops and he looks at me, he goes, that was a great day. And he took a deep breath and actually we both started tearing up, but not like gratitude tears, like thinking about all that we've done with each other. And then the nurse came. I go, okay, I'll be waiting for you on the other side. And he went into the surgery in such a relaxed state. But I'm sharing that with you because here I have created this model really, but I use it all the time. And I use it in places I didn't know when I went into the surgical suite with my husband that I would pull out a conversational resourcing, but I guess it becomes such a life skill that if you like that, we start integrating it into everything that we do. So, I just want to see, thank you, Sarah, for the prayers. Thank you for sharing your experience. He just had his 4th immunotherapy and we're very hopeful. And Maria says, thank you so much. In early childhood, we've long focused on teaching children words to express their feelings, but never had I thought to hear about teaching kids to identify the sensing words. So total aha moment for me. I have to jump to another meeting, but I'm so glad I could attend. So there's some more, and I'm working on a little booklet for parents and teachers and how to teach this to kids. And hopefully I'll be done soon. I've been working on it on Canva. And I have had some things that got in the way, like my husband's diagnosis, but I'm going to be working on it and hopefully can share it with all of you. So thank you. So Carolyn.
Yes, Elaine, thank you so much
You're so welcome.
For what a wonderful presentation. I'm a grandma and I'm learning some things I can use on my grandchildren. So I really appreciate that. I'm not even doing the work, but I'm going to do it on my kiddos.
I got to tell you one more story. I know that people are leaving, but I taught my granddaughter this during the pandemic and she was like 3 and like, we're all living in the same household. Right. So that was also new for us because we all moved in together to be a pod. And so I made a whiteboard with the zones and explained it to her. And she wanted to make little pictures of everybody in the family that I put on little magnets. And so my husband was having a really bad day. So all of a sudden I'm seeing her move the magnets around and she said, Papa's in his high zone, Nana. I said, oh yeah, I saw that too, Madison. So we were down playing and all of a sudden I said, Madison, can you go upstairs to see if Papa is still in his high zone. So she runs upstairs and she comes back down. She goes, Nana, I'm going to move him into his okay zone. He's watching football. He's just fine. But I love that story because again, it's how we can engage. She was 3, how we can engage little kids in thinking about what zones we're in and how that's not only feeling, but it's really also the sensing piece. And what a great life skill that we can have for them and for ourselves, right? And of course, my husband thinks that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
She know that it's football that helps him, one of his resources, get back into his zone.
Mine too, but they don't have it on all year. So
oh gosh. Well, my husband does everything. He does football, baseball. We got fantasy, football and baseball leagues. So we got it all over the place. All right, ladies. Well, you know where to find me. And now what's the name of the city again? Crispa? What
Here?
city are you in again? I have to
I
tell
am in Moorhead, right next to Fargo.
Moorhead. Okay, I've got to
Yep.
tell so basically, Linda, why I'm saying this is because the president of our board has a home in Minnesota and has spent much of his life in Minnesota. So he wanted to know where you all were located. So I'm going to say Moorhead. Because who knows, maybe his house is in Moorhead. And then I'm going to say, you better look these folks up next time I think he's going up there next week. So there you go. Yeah, they go there a lot because they're on a lake. I mean, you guys you're the state of lakes, right? Beautiful lakes. All right. Well, and so he wants me to come up there. If I come up there, I'm going to call you.
Okay.
All right. I want to go and sit on his lake because he showed me pictures and it's just beautiful. So there you go.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No.
It's not his lake, but the lake that's by his property, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
All right, everybody.
All right.
Say goodbye, but I have to say goodbye. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.